Let's say you're craving a burger, but you want it from a place with a goofy-sounding name, and McDonald's, Five Guys, and Shake Shack just aren't tickling your funny bone. Well, never fear, because thanks to the wonders of capitalism and the free market, there's Fuddruckers. Until there almost wasn't. Confused? Let us explain. Today, we're ringing the bell on the rise and fall of Fuddruckers. Okay, get ready to ruck some Fudd. The first Fuddruckers opened its doors in San Antonio, Texas, in 1979. It was actually called Freddie Fuddruckers, and it was founded by Freddie F. Fuddrucker IV of Freeport, Florida. Okay, that's not true. He just couldn't resist the alliteration. It was really founded by Philip J. Romano of Auburn, New York, the same entrepreneur and restaurateur who would go on to found the Macaroni Grill in 1988. When you're a hitmaker, you're a hitmaker. Prior to going into the restaurant biz, Romano was the owner of 2 successful karate schools. He had to sell them to raise the money to finance his first eateries, but we're still hoping he'll eventually combine his interests and create Fuddruckerati to use against thuggish burgers. Romano founded Fuddruckers because, in his own words, "I thought the world needed a better hamburger." Hey, be the change you want to see in the world, right? Romano wanted to get into the burger business, but he didn't want to create just another fast food chain. So instead, he created a burger eating experience that was quicker and easier than a traditional sit-down restaurant, but more substantial than what you're used to getting from fast food joints. For example, like at a fast food place, customers would order at a counter. But like at a restaurant, they would get real dishes and silverware. These days, there are plenty of such places, including well-known chains like Five Guys and Shake Shack. But back at the dawn of the 1980s, there weren't a lot of burger chains quite like Fuddruckers. Romano also wanted his restaurant to have a more grown-up vibe than the fast food places.
Want to do Fuddruckers tonight?
What kind of a girl do you think I am?
And considering the world's biggest fast food burger place was represented by a literal children's birthday party clown, that wasn't going to be difficult. In fact, the bar was so low, Romano felt comfortable his chain would seem more grown-up even if it had the especially goofy name of Freddie Fuddruckers. No, really, that was the original name. So at this point, you're probably wondering, who the hell is Freddie Fuddrucker? And why did Romano name his burger chain after him? Was he an early investor in the business? A war hero who saved Romano's life in combat? A master chef with a secret recipe for the world's greatest burgers? Sadly, no, and no. According to Romano, the name was inspired by an old inside joke in the aviation community about a fictional company called Fuddrucker Airlines. In the 1970s, Fuddrucker Airlines was something between an urban legend and a marketing fad. Allegedly founded by Dudley P. Fuddrucker Jr. of Hicksville, New York, Fuddrucker was humorously held out as the world's only steam-powered airline. The company name appeared on all sorts of kitschy merchandise, like t-shirts, mugs, stickers, embroidered patches, and even novelty pilot's licenses. The name was also briefly used by a group of stunt pilots who flew military vehicles at air shows. We'd love to say that Romano used Fuddrucker as the basis of Fuddrucker because he had some deep, meaningful connection to the name. But the boring truth is, he just kind of liked the sound of the words and went with it on a whim. The name was meant to convey a sense of fun, and we have to agree, he totally nailed it. According to the company, Fuddruckers burgers are made from fresh, never frozen, 100% USDA All-American premium cut beef, cooked to order and served on a sesame-topped bun, baked from scratch in an on-premise bakery. Customers are offered a choice of a 1/3, 1/2, or 2/3 pound patty, and one of 4 different cheeses. They can then build their own burger, so to speak, with toppings from the market-fresh produce fixins bar. Whether they are truly the world's greatest hamburgers, as the slogan claims, is a matter of fierce debate in scientific circles. But they must have come close, because the first Fuddruckers was a smash hit. Within 3 short years, the franchise had 20 locations in the Lone Star State. Emboldened by the success, the company went public in 1983, and then immediately began expanding across the country. They multiplied like wet gremlins, and by 1988, there would be over 150 Fuddruckers scattered about the U.S. With a moniker like Fuddruckers, name recognition grew fast. making the company a fairly legitimate competitor to fast food chains and established burger joints. In 1988, however, Romano would say goodbye to the business he founded and move on to greener, macaroni-flavored pastures. He would sell Fuddruckers to a restaurant operating company called DACA International, who, in 1997, would spin its food division off into a company called Unique Casual Restaurants Incorporated. They, in turn, would sell it a year later to a company called King Cannon, operated by British entrepreneur, investor, and restaurant industry figure Michael Cannon. He would quickly sell it again in 1998 to another company he owned, Magic Brands LLC, which was also owner of the Kookaroo chain of fast casual eateries. So long story short, Fuddruckers has been owned by pretty much every last mother rucker in the food business. Fuddruckers has always been about the burgers.
Fudd's prime.
But that still leaves a lot of room for creativity, and the menu has expanded quite a bit over the decades. For example, in addition to the regular old hamburger, there's also a bacon cheddar burger, a barbecue burger, a bourbon burger, a green chili cheeseburger, a mushroom Swiss burger, a Southwest burger, a Texas burger, and a whole bunch of others. And if beef isn't your thing, they also offer a turkey burger and a veggie burger. Or if you want something a little more interesting, some locations offer a buffalo burger and an elk burger. And if that's not interesting enough for you, some locations have even offered burgers made from lamb, boar, and ostrich, although you presumably have to catch the ostrich first. Even if you aren't in the mood for burgers, Fuddruckers has you covered. The menu also includes buffalo wings, fish and chips, a chili cheese dog, a tilapia sandwich, a chicken sandwich, and a ribeye steak sandwich. We're pretty sure that covers all the food groups. At its height, Fuddruckers had over 220 locations in 35 states, as well as a handful of locations in other countries, including Puerto Rico, Canada, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Chile, Colombia, Panama, Italy, Poland, and Switzerland. But no empire lasts forever, no matter how fun its name is. If you were around in 2008, you almost certainly remember the global financial crisis, the single worst worldwide economic downturn since the Great Depression. Nobody had any money, which was bad for the restaurant business. As a slightly higher-priced alternative to fast food burger joints, Fuddruckers struggled more than most in the difficult economic climate. In April of 2010, its parent company announced it would be waiving the business world equivalent of the white flag and filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Locations were closed, and the company made plans to sell itself to an investment group known as the Tavistock Group for $40 million, which would be distributed to Magic's shareholders. But the sun was shining on Freddie Fuddrucker that day, because at the last minute, Tavistock was outbid by Luby's Incorporated, who ponied up $61 million for the chain's parent company. Luby's tried to make a go of it. Really, they did. But even something as simple as selling hamburgers isn't always quite so simple. Right off the bat, Luby had to go to war, legally speaking.
Have you had a drink today?
Objection, Your Honor, relevancy.
With a former Fuddruckers executive who had continued to operate 5 locations under the name Fuddruckers, even though the company had told him to stop. At the same time, in an effort to make its customers feel safer, in 2010, the chain implemented and began to enforce a no-weapons policy at its locations. As a result, Second Amendment enthusiasts threatened boycotts. Then in 2014, Luby attempted to build the brand out a little bit by opening up the first Fuddruckers Deluxe in Newport News, Virginia. Fuddruckers Deluxe offered all of the amenities of a full-service restaurant, including a waitstaff. It served classic Fuddruckers menu items and a few new ones, but strangely lacked the iconic produce bar. But Fuddruckers Deluxe didn't have the charm of the original fast casual locations and quietly went out of business in 2018. The last straw for Luby's came in early 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic turned the world upside down. Food service businesses struggled in general during the pandemic, and Fuddruckers' premium pricing meant that, once again, it would have a particularly hard time. Not that things were going so great before the pandemic. In 2019, for example, Fuddruckers did a paltry $180 million worth of sales, compared to McDonald's, which raked in somewhere north of $40 billion. Also coming out ahead of Fuddruckers in sales that year were Whataburger, In-N-Out, Steak and Shake, Five Guys, Carl's Jr., Shake Shack, Checkers, A&W, All-American Burger, and a whole lot of others. The writing was on the wall, and in September of 2020, Luby announced plans to liquidate the chain, which at that point consisted of about 80 restaurants. Freddy Fuddrucker would be put out to pasture in August of 2021. Or would he? Things looked pretty bleak for Fuddruckers, but then a hero emerged. Just as it seemed Fuddruckers' time was up, Nicholas Perkins of Black Titan Franchise Systems stepped in and bought the Fuddruckers brand for just under $19 million, becoming owner of 14 locations and franchisor of all others. An entrepreneur who grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Perkins had developed a taste for Fuddruckers by stopping there on his way to and from baseball camp as a teenager. His purchase of Fuddruckers made it the first Black-owned national burger franchise in the U.S. While it's not quite what it was at its height, thanks to Perkins, Fuddruckers is still around today. As of 2024, they currently have roughly 55 locations still open across the U.S., as well as one location in Canada and another in Mexico. And if you're a Fuddruckers fan who happened to hear on the internet that the chain is closing all of its locations, you can relax. According to Perkins, the rumor that the franchise was on its way out was misinformation being spread by a non-credible blog. Not only did he deny the rumor, he claimed Fuddruckers would actually be expanding and welcoming new franchisees into the family in 2024. In Perkins' own highly enthusiastic words, "We look forward to continuing our legacy as the world's greatest hamburger. Bigger, bolder, beefier than ever."
Well, the kids do love Fuddruckers.
Yeah, getting the design any burger you want. Your only limit is your imagination.
Freddy Fuddrucker himself could not have said it any better.
When Americans think of Australia, they think of kangaroos, Crocodile Dundee, and Outback Steakhouse. Only two of those things are actually from Australia. But the decidedly American Outback Steakhouse has been a staple of casual dining culture for over 35 years. Where did it come from? Why the Australia gimmick? Do they even have Outbacks in Australia? Today, we're sinking our teeth into the history of Outback Steakhouse. Okay, time for a walkabout through history. Australia. The land down under, where women glow and men plunder. If you've never been, you'll just have to take Men at Work's word for it. It also means you have something in common with the people who created Outback Steakhouse. You heard right, the founders of Outback Steakhouse, Chris Sullivan, Bob Basham, Tim Gannon, and Trudy Cooper, had never even so much as visited Australia when they opened the chain's first location in a South Tampa strip mall in 1988. So why did they choose to open up an Australian-themed restaurant, you ask? Well, just 2 years earlier, in 1986, the movie Crocodile Dundee became a surprise smash hit and ignited an intense but brief American love affair with all things Australian. Now, you're probably wondering, once they decided to do the restaurant, couldn't they have gone to Australia and done some research? The answer is yes. They could have, but they didn't. And not because they were cheap or lazy, although have you seen the cost of a flight from Tampa to Sydney? Outback's founders made the decision to lean into kitschy American stereotypes about Aussie culture rather than try to replicate the real thing. So a fact-finding mission wasn't necessary. Instead, they went on a shopping spree through junk and antique stores, grabbing basically anything that felt Australian to them, including things like bullhorns and sheep shears. Sheep shears we get, but bullhorns? The decor at Outback Steakhouse isn't the only thing that isn't authentic. Pretty much nothing on the Outback menu is actually Australian. Aussies, for example, don't really do bloomin' onions. Toowoomba is a mountain town that has no seafood, and no matter what Paul Hogan might have taught you, Australians are not big on throwing shrimps on the barbie.
Let's put another shrimp on the barbie.
Let's not.
In fact, real Australians who visit Outback tend to find themselves as confused as Marty McFly walking into the Throwback Cafe in Back to the Future 2. But at least Outback Steakhouse was a massive success, right? Well, not at first. Despite mirroring the successful business model of other chains like Bennigan's and Chili's, people avoided opening day at the first Outback like it was a Mad Max villain. Management even had to ask employees to park all their cars in the lot and invite their friends and family down to avoid looking like an absolute ghost town. It was only after a massive advertising blitz that people started checking the place out, and once they did, there was no looking back. The founders even say other steakhouses in the neighborhood were soon calling to complain Outback was stealing their business. Long story short, by the time the chain hit its 25th anniversary, it would have over 900 locations worldwide. Outback even signed up to sponsor the College Football Hall of Fame Bowl in 1996. The game, which is now known as the vaguely sci-fi sounding ReliaQuest Bowl, is played annually in Tampa, where Outback started out and maintained their corporate headquarters. They kept the sponsorship all the way until 2022, making it the longest-running sponsorship of its kind in college football history. The bloomin' onion, which Outback describes as a special onion hand-carved and cooked until golden, is the steakhouse's signature dish. It's like their Big Mac, if that sandwich was a gigantic fried onion. But the bloomin' onion isn't really an Australian dish. In fact, the only place in Australia you can really get one is at Outback Steakhouse. So where did it come from? The mind of Outback co-founder Tim Gannon. He figured out the recipe for the deep-fried appetizer by tinkering with various spice combinations while working as a chef at Russell's Marina Grill in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1985. Incidentally, we'd wager that's where he also came up with the 17 different herbs and spices Outback uses to marinate their steaks. So why didn't they start a New Orleans-themed restaurant? Probably because there wasn't a hit movie called Crocodile Ledoux.
Here it is, the Outback Steakhouse.
Yes, there is an Outback Steakhouse in Australia. In fact, there are 8 of them, none of which are in the actual Outback, which is probably for the best. The first Australian Outback opened in Parklea, New South Wales in 2001. Since then, they've added 5 more, as well as 3 locations in Queensland. Not bad for a restaurant that is basically poking fun at Australia. For the record, Australian Outbacks are basically just like American ones, except that they call shrimp prawns and they use the motto, "Live Adventurous," rather than the American slogan, "No rules, just right." There are a handful of additional items on the menu, like an antipasto board of sliced meats and cheeses, a steak-topped entree salad, and fried mushrooms called bushies. They also offer 7 types of steak, whereas American Outbacks only usually offer 4. On the other hand, a few items Americans are used to, like mac and cheese, are MIA. Up until 2015, if you wanted an Australian ambiance with lunch, you had to eat in front of a Yahoo Serious movie. That's because Outback didn't start serving lunch until 2015. Why did it take so long? Did they not have lunch in Australia? Actually, it was about protecting their employees from burnout. According to Outback co-founder Chris Sullivan, employees at restaurants that serve both lunch and dinner can easily get trapped into working 80-hour weeks. That can be bad for employee morale, which eventually takes its toll on the level of service customers receive. On the other hand, Outback also didn't want to have to maintain 2 completely different shifts of workers, and having to prepare 2 meals in the same kitchen presented certain logistical problems when it came to keeping food fresh. Nonetheless, after a year-long test program proved profitable, Outback finally decided the hassle was worth the extra money and they made it work. While Outback Steakhouse isn't exactly the Ned Kelly gang, they definitely have some skeletons in the closet. For starters, there's the fact that the bloomin' onion is bloomin' terrible for you. Even without the dipping sauce, it has about 1,960 calories, over 1,400 of which come from fat. To be fair, it's a deep-fried bowling ball, so this probably isn't surprising anyone. What might surprise you is the controversy over the item's description. On the restaurant's website, the popular appetizer was listed as Outback Aboriginal. Aboriginal Australians are the descendants of the continent's original native inhabitants, and the colonization of Australia during the 18th century took a brutal toll on Aboriginal culture. Spinning Aboriginal into a pun to sell a hulked-out onion struck some as poor taste, and the chain was accused of racial insensitivity. Outback apologized and eventually took the term down off its website. Outback found itself in hot onion grease once again in 2018 after the chain fired a server for complaining on Facebook about spending her whole shift preparing a single $750 order for a megachurch that didn't bother to tip her. When the church found out what happened, they felt bad about the oversight and tried to make it right by sending her a tip. Instead, Outback fired the server for complaining and refunded the church's money. Crikey! The internet got wind of the story and it remains a blemish on the Barbie. Outback has also been a lightning rod for lawsuits and has been paying off like a slot machine. For example, in 2009, they coughed up around $19 million over claims that it denied advancement opportunities to women, who had been kept out of higher-level management positions and jobs that came with profit-sharing interests. Then in 2013, they forked over $65,000 for firing a manager due to his disability. 3 years later, they had to shell out $3 million after forcing employees to work for free during an off-the-clock pre-shift preparation period the company called Outback Time. Turns out you can't make people work for free regardless of how fun a name you give it. Then in 2022, it came out that a lot of the food at Outback is microwaved, which a lot of people didn't realize. And even more recently, an Outback in Michigan accidentally served alcohol to a 12-year-old. The boy, who ordered a virgin daiquiri but was served the real Dundee, wound up in the hospital. But despite all the controversy, Outback did right by its employees during the pandemic. David Denny, CEO of Outback's parent company, waived his nearly $1 million salary in order to help cover the salaries of the workers who kept the locations running. The board of directors did the same, and as a result, Outback was able to make it through the pandemic while retaining most of their employees. As American eating habits have changed over the years, steakhouses have become a lot less popular. For a place called Outback Steakhouse, that's not great news. In fact, Americans, millennials in particular, have been slowly abandoning the increasingly expensive casual dining experience places like Outback, TGI Fridays, and Chili's provide. According to experts, these days people are looking for so-called fast casual dining at places like Five Guys, Panera, and Chipotle. Along with the proliferation of things like food delivery services and food trucks, Outback and similar chain restaurants are on the defensive. Competition from other casual dining chains, even other chains owned by Outback's parent company Bloomin' Brands, like Bonefish and Carrabba's, are cutting into profits as well. Outback has been trying to change with the times. In 2022, for example, they began redesigning their locations to dedicate more floor space to takeout and delivery. Conversely, they're also trying to cash in on nostalgia, recently offering a special boomerang throwback menu that featured 7 popular dishes from the original menu, including Alice Springs sirloin, Aussie twisted ribs, and Sydney's Sinful Sunday. However, in February of 2024, Bloomin' Brands announced they were closing over 40 underperforming locations. And while they're not all Outbacks, a lot of them are.
What are your chances of getting out of here with that jacket on?
Is it possible Americans are finally over Crocodile Dundee?
Better than average?
Well, even if they are, there's still hope. Outback's semi-recent expansion into Brazil has been a surprising success, with its Brazilian locations earning 83% of the chain's total international revenue. Brazilians love Outback Steakhouse. Maybe someone should tell Paul Hogan. It might be the perfect time for another Crocodile Dundee movie.
The Olive Garden. When you're here, you're family.
When you hear those simple words, you've either walked onto your own episode of Intervention,
Oh my.
or you've entered one of America's most beloved Italian restaurant chains. Olive Garden found its way into people's hearts and stomachs thanks to its signature decor and unlimited piles of soup, salad, and breadsticks. But how did the home of the never-ending pasta bowl get its start? Today, we're carb-loading the history of Olive Garden. Okay, time to load up on some carbs. Way back in the 1960s and 70s, General Mills was looking to break away from their wheaty-filled past and to make their way into all sorts of other industries. They bought up both Rainbow Crafts, the makers of Play-Doh, along with Kenner Products, the toy company that would go on to make all of the original Star Wars and Jurassic Park toys.
Fire the net!
Those were some pretty good moves. Having already explored aeronautics throughout the 1950s, there seemed to be only one place left for General Mills to turn: the restaurant industry. It started with Red Lobster, a restaurant that first opened its doors in 1968, grew to 5 locations in the 2 years that followed, and was bought up by General Mills in 1970, the year of the lobster. General Mills found quick success with Red Lobster, and by the 1980s, they'd managed to grow it into a nationwide shrimp-slinging enterprise. They naturally hoped to replicate Red Lobster's nationwide success, and so they devised an all-new restaurant to tap into the Italian food market: Olive Garden, or the Olive Garden, if you're fancy. So from its inception, Olive Garden was designed to be anywhere and everywhere. Not a mom-and-pop eatery, but a sprawling franchise meant to spread its pasta and breadsticks all across the nation. Between 1982, the year the world's first ever Olive Garden opened its doors in Orlando, Florida, and the end of the 1980s, General Mills had established 145 locations across America. Olive Garden's success grew to rival that of its crustacean-loving sister company. At the time, Olive Garden was officially called The Olive Garden, a name the chain would stick with for a whole 13 years. Likewise, its slogan was, "Good times, great salad. Olive Garden. Not as much fun as Red Lobster's seafood differently." But hey, it got the point across. Because back then, Olive Garden hadn't yet wowed the world with its unlimited breadsticks or never-ending pasta. Instead, they relied entirely on their bottomless salads to lure customers in. When the company first launched in 1982, its logo featured a simple yet elegant cursive rendition of the restaurant's name. It also adopted a Tuscan style for its architecture, a common practice among upscale Italian eateries of the time, all of whom were trying to distinguish themselves from the red and white tablecloths of a typical Italian joint.
Good flavor, it's not bland. It's a really neat environment, and their food and spaghetti is excellent.
These restaurants branded themselves as places where authentic Italian food could be had, free of heavy pizzas and pastas, and instead filled with seafood, vegetables, and grains. The Olive Garden did not go so far as to adopt a more authentic menu. In fact, they served some of the heaviest pastas human eyes have ever seen. But in 1989, they decided to pull away from the salad thing and stamped Italian restaurant in the logo. Maybe too many people thought the Olive Garden was a wedding venue or something. Technically, it still could be, for some lucky girl. In 1995, General Mills spun off its entire restaurant division in order to create a standalone, publicly traded company. They called it Darden Restaurants, in honor of Bill Darden, the original founder of Red Lobster, who had passed away just 1 year prior. Hopefully, he got to eat one last cheddar biscuit before he checked out. But as restaurant revenue fell in the latter half of the 90s, Darden had to get its act together quickly if the company wanted to show it could make it on its own. So in 1998, Olive Garden got a makeover. In a move that would later inspire Mark Zuckerberg, the restaurant dropped the "V" from its name, becoming known simply as Olive Garden. The company changed its logo to include a bunch of grapes, and it changed its slogan to,
When you're here, you're family.
a gentle hug of a catchphrase that you likely have memorized if you watched TV in the 90s. All the while, they updated their restaurants to look more rustic, even going so far as to model their tables after ones found in Florentine farmhouses. Along with these changes, Olive Garden introduced unlimited soups and, more importantly, unlimited breadsticks. The world would never be the same. These breadsticks alone may have saved Darden from the brink, as customers began to flock to Olive Garden en masse just to stuff themselves with Grassini-inspired appetizers. In 1999, the company tried to boost its image by opening up its Culinary Institute of Italy, a facility that sent chefs and managers to Tuscany in order to train them in the art of true hospitaliano. While some online have claimed the Culinary Institute didn't actually teach employees a thing about Italian cooking, and that it instead served more as a photo op for Olive Garden's corporate side, the company still sent over 100 lucky employees there every year while in operation. While there, these employees apparently spent most of their time soaking up the Tuscan sun with an all-expense-paid vacation. Sure, there were a few short classes sprinkled into the mix, including a class on how olive oil gets pressed and one on the proper way to layer bolognese sauce. But it allegedly wasn't the intensive boot camp Olive Garden made it out to be. This eventually led to public backlash, as many people who had bought up the authentic Tuscan marketing felt misled. Just bring out another round of breadsticks and everyone will forget about it. In the new millennium, Olive Garden continued to find success, even as other competitors rose up to try and take its pasta crown. Both Bravo Italian Kitchen and Buca di Beppo, two companies that formed in the early 90s, grew into viable competitors during this time, and they began to make inroads into Olive Garden's Italian-American market share as the aughts wore on. It seemed not even a glowing viral review from Marilyn Haggerty with the Grand Forks Herald could turn things around.
I also said there's a bar to the right so people know that they could go in and have a drink.
Do you like to go to the bar while you wait?
Oh, I wouldn't mind at all.
By 2012, Darden investors were growing worried about their bottom line, and they wanted to make changes. It was at this time that Olive Garden's slogan changed to, "We're all family here." And then President Dave George went on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon to sign the rights of When You're Here, Your Family over to the TV talk show host, despite Fallon claiming to have never been to an actual Olive Garden location.
Let me be the first to say this. When you're here, your family.
That gift was wasted on him. Olive Garden then ran their first ever never-ending pasta promotion. Starting at just $9.99, customers could eat all the pasta they wanted, which totaled for the restaurant chain a whopping 13 million bowls of pasta over the course of the promotion. The following year, Olive Garden then introduced the Never-Ending Pasta Pass, which, for just $99, allowed 1,000 lucky customers 7 whole weeks of all-you-can-eat pasta. They managed to keep both of these promotions profitable by loading customers up on breadsticks and salad first, before bringing out the first bowl of pasta. All subsequent bowls of pasta were then smaller in size, encouraging customers to slow their roll. The promotion was so successful that they continued to bring it back year after year. In 2017, for instance, the company listed 22,000 passes online at $100 apiece, all of which sold out in less than 1 second. In 2019, they also offered 50 $500 lifetime pasta passes that promised 1 bowl a day for the next 60 years, at less than 3 cents a pop.
Here's to the beginning of endless.
But back in 2014, even with the launch of Never-Ending Pasta, things were still a bit rocky for Darden. After a few attempts at combining Red Lobster and Olive Garden locations into a single food hulk, like those Taco Bell Pizza Huts you sometimes see in the wild, the company decided to sell off Red Lobster entirely. They then focused their attention on Olive Garden. And a leaked 300-slide presentation revealed a litany of issues investors had with the way Olive Garden conducts its business. Many of the issues raised included critiques of Olive Garden's day-to-day business practices, including allegations that they overcook their pasta, criticisms over the lack of added salt in the company's pasta water, and outright attacks on the number of free breadsticks given out each and every year. They wouldn't dare. Many investors wanted to do away with the unlimited breadsticks altogether, but the pro-breadstick caucus held the line, and unlimited breadsticks managed to survive. Sort of. Today, Olive Garden has over 900 locations that span every single U.S. state, much of both North and South America, and parts of both East Asia and the Middle East. While the exact number of breadsticks served fluctuates year to year, the entire chain collectively serves well over 500 million breadsticks annually. Still, after the 2014 uproar among Olive Garden investors, servers are now apparently instructed to serve only 1 breadstick per person per table, plus 1 extra breadstick in a show of goodwill, like 2 nations negotiating peace. Though the breadsticks are still considered unlimited after this initial round, guests have to specifically request a refill if they want more bread brought to the table. Even with all that free bread, Olive Garden still has no issues making dough. Today, Olive Garden generates almost half of Darden Restaurant's $9.5 billion in yearly revenue. That means the Garden outsells Cheddar's, Yard House, and Longhorn Steakhouse combined. While many other chains around America have seen slowdowns in recent years, there seems to be one reason for Olive Garden's staying power. Millennials, known for having ditched chain restaurants in exchange for more unique local experiences, seem to have carved out a corporate-sized exception for Olive Garden. Millennials apparently love the place so much that about 30% of all Olive Garden patrons likewise come from Generation Y, overrepresenting their share of the U.S. population by a whole 6%. What's more, according to a 2023 study conducted by Yelp, Olive Garden is the most popular brand in America's most populated state, California. Wonder where Sparrow ranked. While the restaurant chain ended up ranking 15th nationwide, the Golden State just can't seem to get enough of its pasta-filled goodness. For those on the other coast, the best way to empty your wallet fast is with Olive Garden's Times Square New Year's Bash, a $400 celebration that features a buffet, 3 separate bars, a DJ, and an allegedly mediocre view of the annual ball drop. I mean, it is a giant ball. Is there a good view? Now, you may be asking yourself, whatever happened to When You're Here, Your Family? After holding on to the slogan for half a decade, Jimmy Fallon finally sat down in an Olive Garden for the first time ever with known Olive Garden connoisseur Post Malone. During this dinner, Fallon surprised Post Malone by gifting him the rights to the slogan, a move we can only hope will lead to every future Post Malone video inexplicably taking place in an Olive Garden.
It's done. That's it. How great is that?
Depending on when and where you grew up, waiting too long for a table and paying too much for your meal at a flamboyant novelty eatery like Rainforest Cafe, Bubba Gump Shrimp, or the Hard Rock Cafe was a rite of passage. But only one themed restaurant had the backing of some of the biggest movie stars of the modern era, Planet Hollywood, where diners could admire authentic movie memorabilia while digging into a plate of nachos. Sadly, the restaurant never managed to achieve the same success as its high-profile investors. Today on Weird History Food, we're talking about the rise and fall of Planet Hollywood. Okay, hope you brought your official Planet Hollywood bib, because we're about to tuck into some weird history. Let's travel back all the way to the set of Arnold Schwarzenegger's 1987 hit, The Running Man, where an actor playing a medtech first approached movie producer Keith Barish with a business idea. The man's name was Brian Kestner, and he had a dream inspired by the success of Hard Rock Cafe, but with movie stuff instead of guitars. Kestner's vision was of a magical place where you could see replicas of your favorite movie props, and sometimes catch a glimpse of your favorite celebrity too. Though the likelihood of meeting Julia Roberts at a Planet Hollywood was about as likely as Christopher Lloyd popping his head out of the DeLorean hanging upside down in the restaurant chain's Honolulu location.
Right, Scott!
Kestner's idea had legs. Unfortunately, the name he threw out, Cafe Hollyrock, did not. But Barish was willing to give the restaurant a go, planning the venture with former Hard Rock Cafe CEO Robert Earl. Kestner was given a stake in the realization of his brand, but later complained of receiving minimal stock and even less credit, which, considering how things shook out, was probably for the best. Keith Barish used his Hollywood connections to rope in some A-list investors to go all in on the franchise. Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Demi Moore, and Sylvester Stallone were the restaurant's largest stakeholders, and were often confused as being the owners of Planet Hollywood. That's why it's called acting. Genius performance. Opening its first location in 1991, the business attracted a swell of additional talent until celebrities comprised 17% of the company's ownership. Notable marquee names included Whoopi Goldberg, Melanie Griffith, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Danny Glover, Don Johnson, Tom Arnold, Wesley Snipes, John Hughes, Cindy Crawford, and America's sweetheart, Roseanne Barr. Stars would show up at Planet Hollywood locations and wave to fans in exchange for employee stock, thus creating an incentive for genuine stars to make appearances, as well as an incentive for customers to make the trek out to the nearest Planet Hollywood location. Nothing convinces a family to make the drive from Missoula like the possibility of catching a glimpse of Miami Vice's own Don Johnson. There were other less evident upshots to this arrangement. Barish allegedly enticed Bruce Willis by promising to book his band and to make him the official music video director of Planet Hollywood. Hey, if you're going to make a vanity project, you go all the way. Much like everything else about Planet Hollywood, the menu was hot trash. It was almost as if the marketing department had asked themselves, what do people eat when they're trapped at an airport? And then designed an entire menu around that concept. For example, one infamous menu item featured chicken tenders breaded with Captain Crunch cereal. And boy, did it get soggy from there. From handheld lasagna to a literal knuckle sandwich, Planet Hollywood ran the gamut of bizarre dining choices. The infamous Planet Meltdown dessert was a globe of chocolate that melted under hot caramel and slowly revealed a Planet Hollywood logo. If that sounds sticky and difficult to eat, well, in fact it was. While children seemed to love it, most adults and some rotund food critics couldn't choke it down without comment. In fact, the scathing reviews of Planet Hollywood's cuisine were unmatched until Pete Wells decided to go to town in his notoriously catty New York Times review of Guy Fieri's American Kitchen and Bar restaurant in Times Square. Incidentally, Fieri is the architect behind the current menu at the remaining Planet Hollywood locations. Explains all the bleached blonde hair in the soup. Luckily for Planet Hollywood heads, the appeal of the restaurants didn't rest solely on the celebrities or the food. It was a magical place to dine amongst some of the most cherished and ironic pieces of Tinseltown paraphernalia. We're talking Dorothy's costume, the pottery wheel from Ghost, and yes, even the original Batmobile. And that is pretty sweet. After all, the basic idea of a chain of eateries decorated with authentic movie memorabilia is a pretty good one. Unfortunately, there are only so many interesting pieces of movie history in existence. Consequently, much of the memorabilia featured in Planet Hollywood restaurants were less than essential, closer to a straight-to-DVD American Pie sequel than Gone with the Wind. This led to locations having to fill space with decidedly unglamorous props, like a replica of the meat slab Rocky used to train, or a toilet seat from the action comedy Bulletproof, autographed by Adam Sandler. Eventually, it became unclear which props were genuine and which were replicas, or even which movies they were supposed to be representing. It's hard to get excited about eating Captain Crunch chicken fingers next to Matthew Modine's polo shirt from Pacific Heights. Today, anyone trying to recapture the magic of being disappointed at a Planet Hollywood can go to Collectibles by Planet Hollywood on Amazon, where the brand is selling off their old memorabilia. That's where you can become the proud owner of a $450 alien eye from Independence Day, a $300 log used by Harrison Ford in Clear and Present Danger, and a $200 pair of jeans autographed by Tom Arnold. Really a steal, as long as you don't mind your room smelling like Captain Crunch. So besides luring in out-of-towners with their confusing memorabilia and bait-and-switch celebrity sightings, how did Planet Hollywood make its cash? Like they say in Spaceballs, merchandising. A gift shop was attached to each location, featuring items all branded with the chain's signature globe-on-a-stick logo, from keychains to t-shirts to watches to leather jackets. Name an essential piece of 90s fashion, and Planet Hollywood sold it. They even had adorable animal mascots, a gorilla named George and a dinosaur named Bubba, now extinct outside of eBay. The gift shops were so popular that Planet Hollywood eventually began to open Planet Hollywood superstores, which were just like regular Planet Hollywoods, minus the food. Back in the heady 90s, CEO Robert Earl came up with a bunch of, let's call them enthusiastic, ideas for Planet Hollywood spin-offs. Some of these ideas had legs. 1998 saw the opening of Marvel Mania in Universal City, a pre-MCU bid for comic book fandom that looks downright prescient 20 years later. Another idea that made it off the ground was a cafe called Cool Planet, which, before you get too excited, was to be a chain of ice cream parlors, and not a restaurant based on the 1992 animated film Cool World. Other ideas didn't get off the ground, like a Planet Hollywood-themed Barbie doll and a Planet Hollywood credit card, which would presumably make it easier to ring up thousands of dollars in knuckle sandwiches. At least one spin-off ended up outlasting the franchise. The Las Vegas Hollywood Planet Casino has been surviving and thriving since 2007, and you can still visit it today. 5 short years after opening, Planet Hollywood went public with a $1.2 valuation by Bear Stearns. Prices rose quickly to over $32 per share, boosting the value of the franchise to $3.5 billion. For a period of time, Planet Hollywood stock was worth more than General Motors. By 1995, the business was making over $500 million a year. But a series of calamities would see Planet Hollywood stars crashing like a meteor. By 1999, the stock was worth 75 cents. A year later, a publicly disgruntled Arnold Schwarzenegger sold his stake, and Robert Earl began to panic. Fear that the A-list investors from the early 90s were losing their marquee value, Earl began the new millennia by tapping in a new talent to back the brand. Despite successfully wooing Shaquille O'Neal and NSYNC to the cause, Planet Hollywood continued to drop like a Led Zeppelin. There are big enough messes not even Shaq can clean up. Planet Hollywood may have experienced some unique growing pains, but the franchise itself wasn't an inherently bad idea. So, what went wrong? First of all, Planet Hollywood CEO Robert Earl was beset with legal and financial issues from the word go. Earl had still been working on developing Hard Rock Cafe when he'd opened the first Planet Hollywood, and instead of playing it cool, he'd continued opening up locations next to the other gimmicky restaurant franchise he'd created. In 1991, Earl and Planet Hollywood were slapped with a $1.25 billion lawsuit from his former Hard Rock partner Peter Morton, who claimed Earl had stolen trade secrets. In this case, the trade secrets included service of American cuisine, the display of entertainment memorabilia, the loud broadcast of contemporary music, and the availability of souvenir merchandise. That's just like every themed restaurant, man. Although I'm glad we finally know who to blame for restaurants playing obnoxiously loud and bad music. Both sides claim to have won the legal battle, eventually reaching a settlement rumored to be in the neighborhood of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, Earl remained CEO, opening restaurant after restaurant at a feverish pace. At its peak, there were 87 Planet Hollywood locations operating at an estimated cost of $2 million each. After all, it costs a lot to keep 87 restaurants supplied with their share of McHale's Navy prop briefcases and Sergeant Bilko costumes. Unsurprisingly, locations were struggling to break even. The solution was probably not to open more restaurants, although that's exactly what Earl did. even as the novelty wore off and customers wised up to the fact that they'd never run into Arnold Schwarzenegger while eating their knuckle sandwiches. By October of 1999, Planet Hollywood was facing $359 million in debt. Its stock was delisted, and the group declared bankruptcy. Earl blamed the losses on his overeager expansion plan and reduced the number of Planet Hollywood outposts to a slim 35. By May of 2000, the restaurant's stock was relisted, but it failed to recapture the excitement of its initial founding. In October of 2001, exactly 2 years after going bust for the first time, Planet Hollywood filed for another Chapter 11. This time, Planet Hollywood execs blamed the restaurant's poor performance on the September 11th attacks and their effect on tourism dollars. It was a hard sell since the October filing came less than a month after the attacks. That's not to say Planet Hollywood was without its share of horrifying incidents that factored into the franchise's plunging interest. A Planet Hollywood in Cape Town had been the site of a deadly bombing in 1998, while in Moscow, a fan died after falling from the roof during the restaurant's opening. Regardless of the cause, the writing was on the wall for Planet Hollywood, right next to Tommy Lee Jones's bracelet from JFK. By 2018, Planet Hollywood only existed as 6 restaurants and 3 resorts. But weirdly, the last few years have seen a Planet Hollywood resurgence. New restaurants opened in Malta and Qatar, and Cancun and St. Martin both opened Planet Hollywood resorts during the pandemic. With Earl still in charge, the brand has announced plans to sell off some 60,000 pieces of movie memorabilia as NFTs under the name Meta Hollywood, which might be the most Planet Hollywood statement ever made.
For countless fans across the country, Denny's is the ultimate diner experience, with its loaded pancakes, its melts and sandwiches, and, of course, its Grand Slam lineup, all served 24/7. But Denny's wasn't always the all-night, all-American experience it is today. Once upon a time, Denny's was a humble donut shop with an identity crisis, and it was only through a series of unrelated moves that the big yellow sign we know and love came into its own. So today, we're knocking one out of the park with the Grand Slam history of Denny's. Okay, batter up! Way back in 1953, Harold Butler and his business partner, Richard Jezik, opened up Danny's Donuts in Lakewood, California. You may be wondering, how did Harold and Richard settle on Danny's for a name? Well, it was totally random. Neither man was called Danny or had any close friends or family members named Danny. They chose it simply because it was a popular name at the time. Regardless, the duo's donut shop found quick success, and the two were able to grow it to a whopping 6-store chain over just 2 years. But in 1955, Jezik wanted to be closer to his family, and he left Danny's behind, leaving Butler to fend for himself. When, shortly thereafter, one of the locations began to see a decline in sales, Butler decided to change up its menu. He introduced burgers to all locations and increased their operating hours to be round-the-clock, 24/7, 365 days per year, for those late-night hamburger emergencies. Things picked up once again for Butler's burgeoning empire, and the very next year, with the opening of the 8th Danny's location, Butler changed the Danny's name to, drumroll please, Danny's Coffee Shop. He felt the new moniker better reflected the growing list of menu items offered by his chain, which it kind of does. It still sounds like you only sell one thing, Harold. Either way, the new name didn't last. Turns out Butler's decision created some confusion in the Los Angeles area. There was already a coffee shop chain called Coffee Dan's, and customers were having a hard time telling the two apart. And so finally, a single beam of light pierced the clouds to illuminate Butler as he changed Danny's to Denny's, establishing Denny's coffee shops in 1959. Then, just 2 years later, in 1961, Harold dropped the coffee shops from the brand entirely, making his restaurant chain, at long last, simply known as Denny's. With its newfound identity, Denny's trucked on into the 1960s. Using a boomerang-shaped blueprint designed by Los Angeles architects Armet and Davis, Denny's restaurants expanded nationwide and brought with them Googie architecture, a style known for upswept roofs and space-age vibes. You know, like you used to see on old cartoons all the time. Soon, both diners and motels all across America adopted the Googie aesthetic, in large part thanks to Denny's expansion into areas that had never before seen the style. Then, in 1967, the chain went international, with its first ever outside the U.S. restaurant opening up in Acapulco, Mexico. The very next year, Denny's went public and began trading on the New York Stock Exchange, where its share price soared right out the gate. For a time, Denny's seemed unstoppable, but all of that nearly came crashing down in 1971, when the brand underwent its first big shakeup as an international publicly traded company. It was that year that Harold Butler, still at the company's head, attempted to buy the then parent company of Vegas's top destination spot, Caesar's Palace. As he would soon find out, it would have been better to stick to the Pancake House. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission caught wind of this deal, along with allegations that Butler was illegally sweetening the pot for certain shareholders of the company if they were to sell their shares to him, and they stepped in to put a stop to it. The deal fell through, and with Butler's public image decimated, Denny's once enviable stock plummeted. Butler's personal shares, which had previously been worth around $80 million, were then only worth $3 million, and he, in turn, stepped down from his place as chairman of the company. While Butler would go on to work with Winchell's Donuts, Noggles, and JoJo's, the Denny's brand would have to carry on without him. Someone, somewhere, gently sang Moons Over My Hammy to the tune of Moon Over Miami. In 1977, Denny's introduced their first ever Grand Slam breakfast exclusively to customers in the Atlanta area. The meal was named in honor of baseball legend Hank Aaron, who played for the Atlanta Braves. Just 3 years earlier, Hank had broken Babe Ruth's long-standing record of 714 career home runs, and he'd become a hero to both Atlantans and Braves fans alike. The breakfast he inspired was a home run among customers, and Denny's soon started selling it everywhere. The company continued to expand into the 1980s, with their 1,000th location opening up in 1981. By then, they had a presence in all 50 states and had likewise expanded into both Canada and Japan. And when the popular restaurant chain Sambo's, which had over 1,000 locations heading into the 1980s, filed for bankruptcy in 1981, Denny's swooped in and bought up many of their closing locations. They wiped away the Sambo's branding entirely and turned these locations into full-time Denny's restaurants. Shortly after, only 2 Sambo's locations remained, the last of which changed its name to Chad's in 2020. Later in the decade, in 1988, Denny's attempted the unthinkable. They decided to close down all but 6 restaurant locations for Christmas Day in order to give their employees a much-needed break. It was the first time in well over 20 years that Denny's would take a day off, and Christmas just so happens to be among their busiest days. It's the day all the divorced dads show up after burning the turkey. This one-day break was projected to cost $5 million in lost revenue. Even so, Denny's was determined to give their more than 60,000 restaurant employees a day off. The only problem? Many locations, having never closed their doors once, hadn't bothered installing locks. Meanwhile, these locations that did have locks had never once used their keys. So, those things were long gone. Ultimately, more than 700 Denny's locations had to have their locks either freshly installed or entirely replaced, making the day off a much costlier and far more chaotic gesture than they expected, which sort of sounds like eating at Denny's. Then, just a couple years later, Denny's would encounter a far more serious problem. In the early 90s, many black customers, feeling that they had experienced discrimination at Denny's locations due to their race, filed 2 class action lawsuits against the corporation. In one of these lawsuits, the plaintiffs argued that locations had been ejecting black customers, segregating black from white customers, using racial epithets, failing to honor advertised specials for black customers, and trying to limit the number of black customers in a restaurant at any one time. Denny's ended up settling for a whopping $54 million, and thousands of black Americans who'd taken part in the lawsuits received what was at the time the largest ever payout for a violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. After the settlement, Denny's went on the defense. They began donating to black organizations by the hundreds of thousands. They increased the number of black models and actors used in their advertising, and they hired a bunch of undercover diners to eat at Denny's restaurants and document any discrimination they might encounter. Meanwhile, in 1994, Denny's became among the largest sponsors of the Save the Children charity, an organization that provides children around the world with better health care and increased economic and educational opportunities. Also, plenty of Denver omelets. Through these changes in their business practices, Denny's was quickly able to turn around their brand's image, earning themselves the #1 business for minorities in Fortune magazine's Year 2000 rankings. In 1997, Denny's introduced their first ever Denny's Classic Diner location in Fort Myers, Florida. This location was a throwback to the 1950s era diners, and people like the concept so much that they've since grown the Classic Diner brand to encompass nearly 50 locations across the U.S. In the new millennium, Dateline NBC ran a 2004 Dirty Dining expose on 10 of the top casual dining chains in America. Keep watching. This story doesn't end the way you might think. The list of restaurants investigated, including big names like Chili's, Red Lobster, Waffle House, and Denny's. In the end, Denny's fared the best and had the fewest health code violations of all the restaurants. a feat they attribute to their strict adherence to HACCP principles, officially making Denny's the cleanest, greasiest spoon to ever smother some hash browns. In 2009, Denny's ran a Super Bowl commercial that promised free Grand Slams for everyone on the Tuesday following the big game. While Denny's is known for giving its aging customers free Grand Slams on their birthdays, the rush created by this particular promotion proved to be far bigger than anything they anticipated. Denny's ultimately gave away over 2 million Grand Slams on that one single Tuesday, a cost that was somewhat mitigated by sales of both coffee and juice, as well as the increased brand loyalty that came with giving away so many free breakfasts. The following year, Denny's saw rapid expansion as the brand partnered up with all-new Flying J locations to create combination gas station restaurants for truckers and vacationers alike, and anyone who refuses to stop at Cracker Barrel. And just 1 year after that, Denny's began working with No Kid Hungry, a charity organization that helps feed kids across America. The company has since raised over $12 million for the charity, allowing them to provide well over 100 million meals for kids in need. Then in 2012, Denny's created another Grand Slam success when they introduced a menu inspired by the Lord of the Rings prequel, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. This Hobbit-themed menu featured everything from Frodo's pot roast skillet to the unfortunately named Hobbit Slam to the even worse named Hobbit Hole breakfast. Those could have used a few more minutes in the forges of Mordor. The Hobbit-themed menu was such a hit that, for the following year's release of The Desolation of Smaug, Denny's brought it back and expanded it, including this second time all-new items like Bilbo's Breakfast Feast and Smaug's Fire Burger. For those looking to go on an unexpected journey out of the Hobbit Hole and get a little fancier with your Denny's selection, you may have missed your chance. For a brief period, from 2014 to 2018, a Denny's opened up in New York's financial district. As a bit of a joke, they had on their menu the Grand Cru Slam, a Grand Slam breakfast that catered to the financial district's upscale clientele. It came with 2 Grand Slam breakfasts, along with a bottle of Dom Perignon Premier Cru and a $300 price tag. They ended up selling about one of these fancy Grand Cru Slams per week, mostly to tourists who were comfortable spending $300 on irony. Today, Denny's has over 1,500 locations worldwide. These locations are in all 50 states and about a dozen different countries, including 1 location in the UK, a handful in the Philippines, the UAE, and New Zealand, and a bunch scattered around both Central America and the Caribbean. What's more, in more recent years, Denny's has partnered with the Humane Society to ensure their food sourcing prioritizes animal welfare, as much as a place that deals in bacon and eggs can, anyway. For example, in 2012, the company announced that they would no longer source their bacon and sausage from farms that keep their pigs in gestation crates. Then, in 2016, Denny's announced that they would fully make the switch to eggs exclusively from cage-free chickens by 2026. Despite these changes, though, Denny's and its 24-hour diner culture has had a rough go at it since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. While they introduced online ordering back in 2017, they struggled to keep customers coming back during peak pandemic fear. They also had to close down many of their locations for the first time since the 1988 fiasco, and almost half of those locations refused to return to the 24/7 schedule that was the norm before lockdowns. In 2021, the company launched 2 virtual brands, The Meltdown and The Burger Den, to make up for lost revenue, but it seems that they continue to struggle in the post-pandemic period. In 2023 alone, they had to close down 57 restaurants for good, a move that current CFO blames squarely on inflation. But don't despair, there's hope for Denny's yet. Those 57 closures may be balanced out by 30 new planned openings for 2024. The company is likewise leaning harder into pickup and delivery options than ever before, and they're even testing another all-new virtual brand called Banda Burrito in select California markets. Still, with many businesses still struggling in the wake of COVID, only time will tell whether Denny's will hit another Grand Slam or finally strike out. Ever been to the southern half of the United States and found yourself searching for a cup of coffee and plate of seriously greasy diner food at 4 in the morning? Well, if you have, chances are you've been to Waffle House. But how did this repository of hangover-absorbing food come to be? Today, we're going to take a look at the history of Waffle House. Okay, 1 order of weird history coming up. The first Waffle House was located at 2719 East College Avenue in Avondale Estates, Georgia, which is just about 10 miles outside of Atlanta. The diner, which would eventually spawn a massive franchise boasting over 2,000 locations in 25 states, opened its doors on Labor Day of 1955. The chain was founded by neighbors Joe Rogers Sr. and Tom Faulkner. In 1947, Rogers started working as a short-order cook in New Haven, Connecticut, at a now-defunct national restaurant chain called Toddle House. which sounds more like a daycare center than a place to smother and cover your hash browns. By 1949, he had worked his way up to regional manager, and soon after, he moved to Atlanta. Forkner, on the other hand, was a real estate agent, and just happened to be the man who sold Rogers his Atlanta home. The two became friends, and taking their cue from the rise of fast food restaurants like McDonald's, they decided to go into business together. What, doesn't everyone open a greasy spoon with their realtor?
No, not really, no.
Forkner suggested opening a Toddle House, but Rogers didn't think it was right for the market. Instead, they started their own chain, which they named Waffle House. Why Waffle House? Well, in addition to the restaurant being a place where waffles lived, the two men figured putting waffle in the name would encourage customers to order them, and waffles were the most expensive item on the menu. The name was Forkner's idea, and for those wondering, the International House of Pancakes didn't open until 1958. So, sorry pancakes, this is the house that waffles built. Rogers suggested keeping the place open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It proved to be a stroke of genius, and late-night dining for drunk college kids and hungry fugitives hasn't been the same since. Since their mission is always to be open, Waffle Houses are prepared for pretty much anything nature can throw at them. The syrup must flow. Locations are equipped with portable generators in case the area loses power, and the company routinely studies its responses to previous disasters to learn how they can do better next time. They do this because it helps their employees keep earning wages at times when they probably need the most, and in many areas, Waffle House is a place of refuge for the community when things get tough, kind of like the Helm's Deep of the American South. To underscore how seriously Waffle House takes disaster response, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, has devised a scale called the Waffle House Index to measure the severity of natural disasters. No, seriously, this is really a thing. The federal government actually grades disasters on a Waffle House scale. How does it work? Well, a code green means everything is a-okay, Waffle House is open and dishing out the grits. Code yellow, however, indicates that not all is well. Waffle House is serving a limited menu and may have even lost power. But it's not quite time to panic either. Code red means it's absolutely time to panic. Waffle House is closed and the area is in desperate need of assistance and scrambled eggs. With over 2,000 locations in perpetual operation, it doesn't take a math whiz to calculate that Waffle House serves a ridiculous amount of food. How ridiculous? Well, if you were to take all the sausage patties served by Waffle House in a single day and stack them on top of each other, the resulting tower would be 4 times the height of New York's Empire State Building and twice as tall as Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is the world's tallest building. Okay, but what about bacon, you ask?
Yeah, what about it?
Waffle House serves 25,000 miles of bacon a year. That's literally enough bacon to wrap around the entire planet Earth. Bacon-wrapped planet. They serve enough coffee per year to fill 8 Olympic swimming pools. And since 1955, they've cooked over 2.5 billion eggs and served 1.8 billion orders of hash browns. And speaking of hash browns, Waffle House has been around for decades, and like we said, they've sold a lot of hash browns. So many that the chefs have developed a unique language to describe all the options. Using this lingo, if a customer wants their hash browns with sauteed onions, they'd ask for them to be smothered. If they want melted cheese, they ask for the browns to be covered. Peppers would get them jalapeno peppers, capped means grilled mushrooms, diced means grilled tomatoes, topped means chili, country means sausage gravy, and chunked would yield hickory smoked ham. And if a customer wants everything, they ask for browns all the way, with some defibrillator paddles on the side. If this sounds like a lot to remember, don't worry, it's all in the menu. It's like the Rosetta Stone of delicious fried potatoes. You might think the hash brown language is the only unusual form of communication Waffle House uses, but you'd be wrong, all the way wrong. Servers at Waffle House are trained to relay their orders to the chefs using something called the mark system. Rather than use verbal cues or written tickets, this system entails using items like utensils, pickles, slices of bread, and condiment packets to signal chefs about what they need to cook next without anyone having to say or read a single word. For example, a packet of grape jelly tells a chef the server needs an order of white toast. A mustard packet facing up on a plate calls for a pork chop, and a butter packet indicates the server needs a waffle. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, it's not, because details like the position and orientation of the item could completely change its meaning. Take that grape jelly. By itself, it means toast. But place it on the right side of the plate and it suddenly means a sausage omelet. Place a packet of mayo on top and it means well-scrambled eggs. Having your own spy language is useful for conveying orders quickly in the middle of a big rush. Plus, it's just kind of cool, I don't know. So while the whole bit about staying open during disasters to help their employees and the community paints a pretty altruistic picture, there is a darker side to the Waffle House experience. Between 1995 and 2000 alone, Waffle House was the subject of no less than 90 different lawsuits, alleging sexual harassment or making claims of racist practices. That seems like too many. Things got so bad in 2018, Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, Bernice King, called for customers to boycott Waffle House, which is a pretty bad look for a biscuit hut. Waffle House co-founder Joe Rogers Sr. went on the record in 2004, saying he didn't believe the business was racist. He also pointed out that Waffle House had served black civil rights protesters in the 1960s, when many other Atlanta area businesses were denying them service. Nonetheless, decades of allegations made the problem a difficult one to ignore. In addition to allegations of bad business practices, Waffle House also seems to have a little problem with fights. Which, of course it does. It would be weird if people weren't fighting at Waffle House. Fights break out at Waffle House more often than a UFC octagon. In fact, Waffle House fight compilations have grown into its own mini-genre on YouTube, along with Chuck E. Cheese. Something about cheap and plentiful food makes people want to throw hands. Waffle House has thousands of locations that are open until the wee hours of the morning, which is like a bug lamp for rowdy drunks. Waffle House is also infamous for being the center of some seriously disturbing crimes. For example, there are numerous instances of belligerent customers getting naked and punching someone in the face. You can't throw a decent punch with your clothes on, it restricts your mobility. Several locations have also seen employees spike their coworkers' drinks with meth, and multiple people have been fatally shot at Waffle House. Despite the allure of a midnight skillet breakfast, after-hours trips to Waffle House can get dangerous, so be careful out there, folks. Sure, plenty of Waffle Houses have a jukebox, but did you know Waffle House has its own record label? Back in the mid-1980s, Joe Rogers Sr. decided that the chain should be putting out its own tunes. It's unclear how he came to this conclusion. Maybe the musical sizzling of bacon on the grill? Whatever the reason, Rogers Sr. founded Waffle Records. The label released its first song, Waffle House Family, by Mary Welch Rogers in 1985, and its first music video, Bert, named for an employee who made great chili, in 2008. There should be more classic pop songs about great chili. All of the songs on Waffle Records reference food in some way or another. The 1950s pop music styled tune There Are Raisins in My Toast by Danny Jones is a pretty typical example, but despite the food references, they're not commercial jingles. They're legitimate songs in popular musical genres like rock, gospel, and bluegrass. It's like if Weird Al made an entire concept album around his favorite diner. And unless you were listening closely, you might not even notice the songs were Waffle House originals. The company originally made 45 records. For our Gen Z fans, those are the little 7-inch discs, the baby records. Those records would then be stocked in jukeboxes at Waffle Houses across the country. Today, the songs still play from jukeboxes, but they're recorded and distributed digitally, because progress eventually comes to even the greasiest of spoons. If you're wondering whether Waffle Records is looking to produce a smash hit, the answer is no, even though they totally could. Who can't relate to a melodious love of breakfast? According to representatives of the label, if anyone wants to play it, that's great, but it's all about inside the restaurant. Over the years, Waffle House has had some pretty impressive celebrity guests singing its praises. Not literally. To date, nobody has done guest vocals on Waffle Records. For example, while you'd probably figure sophisticated foodie types wouldn't appreciate something as basic as Waffle House, celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain was actually a fan. Bourdain contextualized the pure Americana of Waffle House, saying, "It's warm, yellow glow, a beacon of hope and salvation, inviting the hungry, the lost, the seriously hammered, all across the South to come inside, a place of safety and nourishment." He was truly a poet. Waffle House is also wildly popular among the hip-hop community. Jay-Z, Future, Gucci Mane, and 2 Chainz have all made references to the diner in their lyrics. And Ludacris and Lil Baby are on record as loving the patty melt. And in January 2015, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West shared a table at an Atlanta Waffle House with Chrissy Teigen and John Legend. Tom Forkner and Joe Rogers founded Waffle House together, but that's not the only thing they had in common. Both men lived well into their late 90s and died within 1 month of each other. Rogers headed off for the Great Waffle House in the Sky in March of 2017, and Forkner joined him a month later in April. Both men remained involved with the company right up until they paid their final check. The fast food chain they created remains a beacon to hungry souls wandering the night in search of chow and is believed to generate over $1 billion a year in revenue. It's It's also known for doing right by its employees. Waffle House is famous for promoting from within, offering stock options to employees, paying cooks bonuses for the amount of food they prepare, and giving their employees health insurance, which is all but unheard of in the fast food biz. Their very first establishment in Avondale Estates, Georgia, has been restored to its original appearance and converted into a Waffle House museum. Visitors can book tours to see over 6 decades of Waffle House memorabilia on display. If you decide to go, be warned. That particular location no longer serves food, which presumably means there are slightly fewer fistfights.
If you're into home-style country food or eating entirely too many biscuits in the middle of a road trip, then odds are you know about Cracker Barrel.
Yes!
But not everyone has heard the story behind this famously nostalgic old country store, or about all the trouble they've gotten themselves into over the years. So, today we're going to take a look at the country fried history of Cracker Barrel. Okay, grab that bowl of sawmill gravy and browse some of America's finest kitsch while we tell you all about the barrel. Dan W. Evans was born October 11, 1935, in Tennessee. As he got older, he attended military school, joined the Marines, and served in the Korean War. After the war, Evans worked as an aide for his uncle, Congressman Joseph L. Evans, then as a teller at a bank owned by his brother, and finally as a sales representative for an oil company founded by his grandfather. In business, it isn't who you know, but how many companies your family owns. It was while he was at this last job that Dan noticed that many of the stations he worked with had lost traffic after being bypassed by new highways. To combat this situation, Evans decided to try something new. He would build a gas station that also functioned as a gift shop and restaurant. On September 19, 1969, Dan Evans opened his first location on Highway 109 in Lebanon, Tennessee. He called the business Cracker Barrel. Why? Because they served nothing but saltiness by the pound. Actually, the name Cracker Barrel has a double meaning. The term Cracker Barrel, which originated in the 19th century, was a direct reference to the literal barrels of crackers that used to be standard fare in country stores. But Cracker Barrel is also an adjective, which, according to Merriam-Webster, is suggestive of the friendly homespun character of a country store. Kind of feels like they added that definition after trying Grandpa's country fried breakfast.
Yeah, they did.
Cracker Barrel's business plan was to target tourists traveling the interstates. Evans reasoned that if the whole chain served the same reliable comfort food, travelers would learn to look for the franchise wherever they may be. The strategy was a huge success. Evans got out of the gas business to focus solely on the carb-loaded franchise he had created. Today, a full 40% of Cracker Barrel's customers are travelers, and a whopping 83% of their restaurants are located off interstates. In February of 1970, Evans incorporated Cracker Barrel and went on an expansion tear, building new locations by gas stations off busy interstate roads. The effort paid off big time, and by 1981, the company went public. If you've ever been to a Cracker Barrel or seen a picture of the inside of one, then you know that the walls are decorated with all sorts of vintage-looking signs, photographs, tools, and toys, like a Depression-era Batcave. While it would be natural to assume these are just cheap reproductions used to flavor the decor, the fact is they're all 100% real antiques, which is another way of saying they're all probably haunted. When Dan Evans was getting the very first Cracker Barrel ready to open, he hired local antique store owners Don and Kathleen Singleton to help him achieve the rustic, country store feel he was going for. They did such a bang-up job, the position has become something of a family business. Today, their son Larry is now in charge of stocking Cracker Barrels with area-appropriate antiques, meaning you won't find any team photos of the Cincinnati Red Stockings on the walls of a Kentucky Cracker Barrel. It's a legitimately huge job. Cracker Barrel headquarters in Tennessee even includes a massive warehouse that contains nearly 100,000 such antiques, each meticulously restored and prepared for the day it hangs on the wall of a Cracker Barrel. In addition to the antiques, each location also comes with a few standard features. For one, every Cracker Barrel has a horseshoe and ox yoke hanging over its front entrance. There's also always a deer head on the wall over the mantel, a display cook stove in the retail area, and a stoplight over the location of the restrooms, which implies the bathroom sees a lot of foot traffic. Listen, if you don't make a mid-meal trip to the John to make room for more Cracker Barrel, you're not really eating at Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel is primarily a restaurant, but it derives a full 20% of its revenue from retail sales. The chain accomplishes this by taking advantage of the fact that patrons waiting for a table are essentially a captive audience, with nothing to do but browse the barrel's wares, including branded food, music, apparel, games, and toys. And their online store has pretty much anything you can think of, with entire departments devoted to things like clothing, furniture, personal care, and even something called nostalgic electronics. So, like a Game Boy holding a copy of its high school yearbook? The strategy is so effective that Cracker Barrel makes an astounding $2.7 billion a year in retail. That breaks down to about $415 for every square foot of retail space, which, according to the Motley Fool, is about as well as Walmart does. Their best-selling item? Rocking chairs. When Dan Evans opened the very first Cracker Barrel, he placed 2 rocking chairs on the porch. Since then, Cracker Barrel locations have always kept rocking chairs out front. The chairs Evans selected were made by the Hinkle Chair Company of Springfield, Tennessee, and the same company still makes every chair for every Cracker Barrel. Hinkle, a family-owned company that has been in the furniture business for somewhere in the neighborhood of 180 years, makes roughly 200,000 chairs a year for Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel sells those chairs for $219.99. If you do the math, and don't worry, we'll do it for you, that's just about $44 million a year in rocking chairs. Not bad for an old country store. And that's not even counting those sweet sock monkey profits. Speaking of toys, Cracker Barrel does not want anyone getting antsy while waiting for their food to arrive. So to help customers pass the minutes, there's a peg game on every table. For the uninitiated, the peg game is a wooden triangle with 15 holes drilled into it. Every hole except one is filled with a peg. To play, you just jump one peg over another and into an open space. Then you remove the peg that got jumped. Repeat until, hopefully, just one peg remains. Seems easy, right? Well, it's not. In fact, if you manage to pull it off, you are, at least according to the game, a genius. Or you're someone who looked up one of the many How to Beat the Cracker Barrel Peg Game in 1 Minute videos you can find all over the internet. Ah, YouTube, you were the genius all along. As if the rocking chairs weren't enough, Cracker Barrel is also making a pretty penny selling country music albums that are exclusive to their stores. And Cracker Barrel ain't messing around either. The chain has recruited bona fide country superstars like Winona Judd, Alan Jackson, and even Dolly Parton to record for its label. In fact, in 2012, Parton's 2-disc set entitled An Evening with Dolly even went gold for Cracker Barrel's in-house label. Hopefully, Dolly eats for free at every Cracker Barrel. You know, if she didn't already. Among many others, Cracker Barrel's exclusive label has also released albums by Alabama, Charlie Daniels, Alison Krauss, and Kenny Rogers. That's a decent lineup for any country music label, let alone one belonging to a roadside mashed potato dispensary. Cracker Barrel is truly great at making nostalgic comfort food for weary travelers. The only thing they're better at than slinging rocking chairs and chicken fried steak is getting themselves into trouble. In 1991, Cracker Barrel announced that it would no longer employ anyone whose sexual preferences failed to demonstrate normal heterosexual values. The company's policy, which was personally instituted by Dan Evans, explained that those lifestyles were inconsistent with the values of their customers and shareholders, or so they thought. Turns out, the new policy caused a public uproar and generated some massive backlash from those very customers and shareholders, and the company eventually reversed the policy. You'd think Evans would have learned his lesson, but instead he spent the next decade, publicly and privately, advocating for discrimination against females and minorities. And in 2001, shareholders booted Evans from his position as president and CEO of Cracker Barrel. His severance package presumably included a peg game and a rocking chair. However, apparently the problem ran deeper than just Evans. In 2004, Cracker Barrel was sued by 21 individuals who claimed the company racially discriminated against them. The plaintiffs asserted that Cracker Barrel had a habit of seating people of color in sections separate from white customers, and giving slower service to black customers and sometimes outright refusing to seat them. It was not a great look. Cracker Barrel eventually settled the case for just under $9 million. The company has also been accused of discriminating against the disabled, underpaying its employees in violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act, selling decorative pineapples that were slicing people's fingers, serving a customer a glass of kitchen cleaner instead of water, and serving another customer a burger with a razor blade in it. And before you ask, no, razor blades are not traditionally offered as a side. Then in 2013, Cracker Barrel ran into some trouble when it licensed its name to a line of supermarket meat products made by Smithfield Foods. Problem was, Kraft Foods had been selling its own brand of Cracker Barrel cheese in supermarkets since the mid-1950s. Kraft was worried customers would get confused, which makes sense, we're pretty confused. So they filed a trademark infringement suit against Cracker Barrel restaurants in 2013. Once all the dust had settled, Cracker Barrel was left using the name CB Old Country Store for its supermarket products, which now includes things like baking mixes, bacon, and deli meats. More recently, Cracker Barrel stirred controversy by giving customers the option of substituting plant-based Impossible sausage for the usual meat-based sausage. That may seem harmless, but you don't know the barrel. The thought of Cracker Barrel offering a non-meat sausage genuinely outraged some patrons. Apparently they thought they would be forced to eat it or something. Good news for those who were in favor of the new product. Cracker Barrel essentially ignored the criticism and the Impossible sausage remains on the menu. Given how much Cracker Barrel's business model depends on travelers, it makes sense that the company uses billboards as its primary means of advertising. In fact, Cracker Barrel has over 1,600 billboards in the U.S., accounting for approximately 40% of its entire marketing budget. The company has even described itself as being among the top billboard advertisers in the restaurant industry, a distinction we assume it uses to bully other restaurants. The bottom line is that those billboards are doing their job. As of 2023, the company has 665 locations spread out over 45 states. That is a lot of rocking chairs. Restaurant chains. For decades, they were pretty much everywhere. But lately, it seems many of the oldest and best known have been disappearing with alarming frequency. Are they being abducted by aliens? Vanishing into an alternate dimension? Or are conventional market forces to blame? The people need answers. So, today, we're going to take a look at the rise and fall of chain restaurants. Okay, time to take a look at the first link in the chain of restaurants. Just so we're all on the same page, a chain restaurant doesn't serve chains, or make you wear chains, or anything like that. It's a group of food service businesses with multiple locations that all share the same name and concept. That being said, there's no universal agreement on how many restaurants you need to have a chain. It's kind of like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. There's also more than one ownership model. Some chains are all owned by one company or individual, but many others are based on a franchising model that allows for individual ownership of the different locations. When it comes to restaurant chains, the example most people are familiar with is fast food chains like McDonald's or Jack in the Box. Not all chains, however, need to be about clowns selling hamburgers at drive-thrus. They can be casual dining restaurants, fine dining establishments, fast casual places, and clowns don't actually have to be involved at all. Technically speaking, the first chain restaurant was called Harvey House, and it served what was basically the era's equivalent of diner food. It was founded in 1878 by an entrepreneur named Fred Harvey, who had a plan to build multiple locations along the railroad lines. And Harvey was evidently the kind of man who saw his plans through. He built Harvey houses along the St. Louis-San Francisco Railway, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe Railway, as well as several others. Just 2 years after he started, his chain already had 17 locations, and it would have 84 at its peak in the 1930s. When it comes to chains that did not get an assist from the railroads, first gets a bit trickier to define. The first Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs opened in 1916, but the second one didn't open until 1959. A&W restaurants trace their origin to a root beer stand that opened in 1919, but they didn't actually open a restaurant until 1923. Meanwhile, White Castle, which opened in 1921, had already invented the fast food burger joint by that point, and building multiple locations was always part of their business model. These places all started out regionally and then slowly branched out. Other early entries included Dairy Queen, whose reign started in 1940, Dunkin' Donuts, who have been making the donuts since 1948, and California's In-N-Out Burger, which got started the same year. But of course, these examples are all really more like glorified hot dog, hamburger, and beverage stands than like real restaurants. If you want the first real chain restaurant, then you probably have to look to Howard Johnson's. Technically founded as a drugstore in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1925, by the middle of the Great Depression, Hojo's would grow into a chain of full-service restaurants, vastly more complex than any of the burger joints. If you've ever driven around the United States, then you know pretty much anywhere you go, coast to coast, you're going to pass a lot of fast food places. And that's neither an accident nor a coincidence. In fact, the rise of fast food chains is directly related to the elaborate highway system America built during the 1950s and 60s. Those highways encouraged Americans to drive more and to drive further. Naturally, those travelers eventually needed to eat. And while trying new things in unfamiliar places can be a thrill, not everyone has the time or inclination to be thrilled. Consumers on the go are actually much more likely to stop at a familiar place, where they already know what to expect. Chain restaurants provided that familiarity, so not surprisingly, they started popping up everywhere. The proliferation of fast food eateries took the concept of chain restaurants and franchises and made it national. These were the decades when a McDonald's started springing up in every city. They also saw the birth of Jack in the Box, Carl's Jr., Fat Burger, Wiener Schnitzel, Taco Bell, and Del Taco. And those are just the chains from California. There was also Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Arby's, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Sonic, Subway, Wendy's, and a whole bunch of others. In the spirit of full disclosure, we should say that a lot of non-fast food restaurant chains were also born in this era. Ruth's Chris, Cracker Barrel, IHOP, Red Lobster, Denny's, TGI Fridays, Benihana, and Waffle House, just to name a few. But really, America had become a fast food nation, and it would stay that way for a long, long time. The success of chain restaurants in the 50s and 60s meant an explosion of them that would last for the next 3 decades. The 1970s, for example, brought us Ruby Tuesdays, Bennigan's, Starbucks, Panda Express, The Cheesecake Factory, Chi-Chi's, Chili's, and the always fun to say, Fuddruckers. The 1980s saw the rise of Olive Garden, Five Guys, Outback Steakhouse, Applebee's, TCPY, and because the 80s were the 80s, Hooters. And the 1990s spawned places like Panera Bread, Chipotle, Jamba Juice, and Kenny Rogers Roasters. And don't even get us started on the slew of Hard Rock Cafe-style themed restaurant chains that sprung up, including All-Star Cafe, ESPN Zone, House of Blues, Rainforest Cafe, and Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and about a zillion others. Revenues peaked in the mid-1990s, but that explosion came with a few more than a few downsides. For one, by the end of that decade, chains had come to so completely dominate so many commercial spaces that it had become all but impossible for local mom-and-pop restaurants to survive. That, in turn, had the effect of homogenizing American cities. While it was once just the fast food restaurants that were the same in every town, suddenly, all the restaurants were the same. Vast swaths of America's culinary heritage were lost. And the local character of neighborhoods across the country was slaughtered wholesale in the name of squeezing in one more Buffalo Wild Wings. That being said, who doesn't like wings? But the unfettered expansion of the chain restaurant business could not last forever. With the turn of the new millennium, the good old days were over. Well, not for fast food chains. They mostly kept doing okay. But over the first 10 years of the aughts alone, many of America's biggest full-service restaurant chains lost more than 50% of their sales and were forced to close hundreds of locations across the nation. And the 2010s weren't really much better. You might guess the decline was because people had decided to go back to eating unique local cuisine. But your guess would be wrong. Once successful chains like Big Boy and Ponderosa had let their brands become stale and their menus become outdated, their customers became other people's customers. Planet Hollywood, ESPN Zone, Casa Bonita, Blimpies, TCPY, Damon's Grill and Sports Bar, Country Kitchen, and Don Pablo's all found themselves closing restaurants and laying off large portions of their staff. Even the once mighty Bennigan's, which today is down to just 10 locations, had to file for bankruptcy protection in 2008. And a lot of other places just folded outright. For example, we lost Chi-Chi's in 2004, Steak and Ale in 2008, and Kenny Rogers Roasters in 2011. It was a rough time, and it was only going to get rougher. All these chains were closing and contracting, but of course it wasn't because people had given up eating, and they hadn't started cooking more either. Turns out, the absolutely cutthroat level of competition in the restaurant chain business had created an opening for a whole new generation of leaner, meaner competitors. Fast casual chain restaurants. The fast casuals actually started springing up way back in the 1990s. Chipotle was an early successful example of the model. The idea was that fast casuals would be cheaper than full-service restaurants, but still provide a healthier, higher quality cuisine than what you would expect to get from a fast food joint. Whether the higher quality of the cuisine is real or perceived, the model seems to be one that's working right now. The focus at these places tends to be on providing fresher ingredients and greater personalization of what goes into any given customer's meal. And chains like Panera, Moe's, and Tender Greens have all latched onto the trend and made a success out of it, to some extent or another. How much of a success? Well, in 2009, there were just over 17,000 fast casual restaurants in the U.S., and they did about $19 billion in sales. By 2018, there were 35,000 of them, doing nearly $48 billion in business. That success, of course, was slightly tempered by a little something called the COVID-19 pandemic. If you remember anything about that little time in history, it very well might be that your favorite restaurant chain closed forever. Quarantine was a tough blow for the food service business, and restaurant chains were no exception. Many didn't survive, though it was hard to feel emotional about it at the time since, there was a pandemic going on. The chains that did make it through the pandemic weren't unchanged by the experience. In fact, a lot of them were very, very changed. Staying competitive in the pandemic often meant drastic alterations to a chain's menu, adding pickup and delivery options that may not have previously existed, or even switching locations. It also meant becoming tech innovators, which was something the restaurant industry wasn't historically really great at. But once the pandemic forced them to evolve, they finally started embracing innovations like QR code menus and streamlined apps. And many chains have since become more open to spending on technology. The TLDR of it all is that for a whole bunch of reasons, full-service chain restaurants just aren't really a reliably lucrative business model anymore. At least not when compared to the leaner, meaner model used by fast casual places, or the seemingly invincible model used by fast food places, which are like the indestructible roaches of the chain restaurant world. They'll be here after humanity is long gone. What this means is that in the years to come, we're likely to see full-service chains like Applebee's, Olive Garden, and Outback Steakhouse continue to cede ground to the competitors. And based on the recent demise of Howard Johnson's, Red Lobster, and a number of other chains, we should probably prepare ourselves to lose a few more. It won't happen overnight, and full-service chains will probably never go away completely. In fact, casual dining has even been experiencing a bit of a comeback in the last couple of years. But in the long term, we're not so sure investing in a full-service chain restaurant is the way to go. But you may think different, and if so, put your money down and let it ride.